welcome everyone today to the Legally Blissed podcast conversations. And I would love to welcome Amy Impellizzeri. She is a reformed corporate litigator, a 2-year DC federal court clerk, a former startup exec, and award-winning author. After spending a decade at one of the top law firms in the country, Amy left to advocate for working women, eventually landing at a VC-backed startup company, Hybrid Her, named by Forbes Women as a top website for women, while writing her first novel, Lemongrass Hope, which was named a 2014 Indie Fab Book of the Year bronze winner in romance. I love that. Okay. Is this lawyer romance? Her sophomore novel, Secrets of Worry Dolls, was an editor's pick in Forward Reviews magazine. Her newest novel, I Know How This Ends, has been called perfect for fans of This Is Us by Book Tribe. Amy's first nonfiction book, Lawyer Interrupted, was published by the American Bar Association in May 2015 and has been featured in theatlantic.com, Above the Law, ABC 27, and more. Amy is a tall poppy writer, past president of the Women's Fiction Writers Association, and a contributor to She Is Fierce in Women Writers, women's books. Amy's essays and articles have appeared in the Huffington Post, Writer's Digest, The Glass Hammer, Divine Caroline, the ABA's Law Practice Today, and Skirt Magazine, among more. So, whoa, okay. I have to ask you, well, first of all, welcome. And
thank you. Thank you. That was very beautiful listening to that laid out like that. So I very much appreciate
That's
that.
all you.
No.
That's amazing. I'm so impressed. And when I heard you, I've listened to you on a podcast in the past. It was a Wake Up Call podcast.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it was so good. I was like, oh my gosh, like I love her story. And I'm always like, sometimes I'm a little bit hesitant to go back and dig in too much to someone because I don't ever want to assume to know what everyone, like other people don't necessarily know about a guest.
Right.
But I'm very curious. Like, I would love to know, where do you get your inspiration?
So yeah, it's funny because I was a corporate litigator for 13 years. But I always say I was always a writer. So I was, as a little girl, I always was, I had a lot of diaries. I had journals lined up on my bookshelf. I was always narrating the room when I'd walk in. Like, I was a writer, but I also was always going to be a lawyer. I knew that about myself. And so when I started college, I was writing. I would still be filling those journals. I was taking creative writing classes, and I was also on my path to become a lawyer. And I actually got some advice, for good or for bad. I'm not really sure how I feel about it now. But a friend who was already in law school, he was a couple of years older than me, and he had already gone to law school, and he came back to visit us in college, and he said to me, Amy, you can't do both. Like, you have to pick. You have to decide whether you're a creative writer or a lawyer. And he said, when you write, you're not going to be able to write in your own. If you're a lawyer, you're not going to be able to write in your own voice. You're going to be writing in your clients' voices, and so you really have to pick one. And so I, boxed up all my creative writing. I put everything in a box, literally, and put it away for a long time. And I went to law school, and then I worked in the law for many years. Mm-hmm. And I took that path of not writing in my own voice. And so all these things were happening to me over the years. I don't know how much you know about my story, but I lived in New York during 9/11. And then also there was a residential plane crash on my corner 2 months after 9/11 that I survived. And so these things were happening. And also my law career I was working at a very big law firm. There was a lot of drama in my law career, both in the courtroom and outside of it. And all of these things were happening, and I had no voice to sort of work through them, express them. And certainly the plane crash was a big pivotal moment for me. I continued, I stayed in the law, and I stayed in New York for many years after that. I didn't leave the law for many years after that. But as soon as I left the law, I left for what was supposed to be a 1-year sabbatical
Yeah.
now over a decade ago.
The
Yeah,
sabbatical. Like,
yeah. So I left for what was supposed to be a 1-year sabbatical. And when I left, I really didn't have a clear plan, except that I was going to do a lot of things that I wanted to do. And I was going to really spend the year like exploring, and I was going to write. And as soon as I stepped away from the law for like a minute, all of the things that had been happening to me since I last boxed up my writing sort of started to manifest themselves on the page, really. And so that is my long way of saying my inspiration comes from living, really, and from a long time of ignoring my voice and reclaiming it. And it's taken me really, truly like a decade to reclaim it.
Wow. So let's say that you were in the position of the guy that you were talking to.
Yeah.
That said, hey, let's say this young aspiring lawyer came up to you and said, hey, like, I love writing, but I want to be a lawyer. What advice would you give her right now, knowing what you know now?
Yeah. So I would say what I do say option, which is do it on the side. So if you really want to go to law school and you really want to be a lawyer, do it. Do it. Do it for the right reasons. I'm always very cautious about people who say they want to go to law school if they don't have a reason why. But do it, go to law school, but don't give up the writing. Don't give up the art. Don't give up whatever it is that's your creative outlet. Don't give it up for 2 reasons. One, it doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense to give up a whole part of yourself. Yeah. But 2, the law is actually I was under this misconception for a long time. I thought the law, I tell this story. I worked at Skadden in New York. And at the time I worked at Skadden for 10 years of the time, my tenure at Skadden, we were in the Condé Nast building, which is the same building that houses like the Vogue offices and all the, Vogue magazine conglomerate. And so those were on one side of the office, of the building, and the law firm was on the other side of the building. And you would literally every morning walk in, and I would do this exercise. I would stand back and watch the tide of people, and the lawyers you could clearly visibly see them walking on one side, and the beautiful people were walking on the other side. and I need to tell you, I want to be on I would stand there every single morning and think to myself, I want to be with the beautiful people. Like, I want to be there. They were creative. They were fun. And listen, they were working hard, right? Like, I'm not under any illusion of like what they were doing, but I had this idea that you had to be one or the other. And so after I left the law, I figured out that actually the law does attract so many creative people, and then doesn't necessarily give them an outlet for that creativity. So I often tell people, by having a side artistic venture, even if it doesn't lead to a paid gig or a self-subsidizing gig, to have that creative outlet on the side will help fuel the legal career, if indeed that is where you're meant to be. So for me personally, I'm a big person for not looking back. It definitely, I don't have any regrets about boxing up the writing. Because I found it again. So I'm so grateful that I found it again. I would have lots of regrets if I had never found it again. But I do encourage people to not give it up entirely. It's not necessary.
So why do you think that attorney gave you that advice?
I think he was trying to be helpful. He was in law school. He wasn't practicing yet. He was in the throes of it. He was feeling very overwhelmed.
Sure.
He was giving me very specific advice in the context of I was taking this American Lit class, and I got a C on my Lolita paper. I did not understand Lolita in the same way my American Lit professor understood Lolita, and I still don't understand Lolita in a lot of ways. Most people do. And I was like saying to him, oh my gosh, I got a C. I'm never going to get into law school. I can't write. And he said to me, whoa. you have to give up this idea that you can do both. And so I extrapolated it into this like, big monster missive. But the truth was, he thought he was giving me good advice. He was, saying like, you got to pick one. He felt very singularly focused. He was in law school and he was not the right person. That's the problem. He wasn't the right person for me to be asking advice of at that time. And so internalizing the advice he gave me was potentially dangerous, but thank goodness it all worked out.
Amy's advice is to be very careful about where you get your advice.
Yes. Be careful what you wish for.
Right? Like consider your sources. If someone is like struggling in the throes of their first year of law school,
that's not the right, that's not the right source of advice.
But you do that, right? Like you're in college and you look at someone who's in law school and you're like, oh, their shit, right? They know what's going on.
Listen, and even somebody who's new to the practice, who's still finding their way, is not necessarily going to have all the answers. And no one person has all the answers, right? So it's about taking collective experience and it's about following your own gut too, and it's about following your own path. I used to say I have a very untraditional, unconventional path to publishing, but then I learned that everybody has their own path to publishing. It's all very unique. And so then I really started to understand in a very concrete way that we all have our own universal path, right? And I have to be respectful of that.
Right. Yeah. I think that's a good thing to think about whenever your opinions differ from other people's, especially like when it comes to politics. Like you never really know what someone else's path experience has, have been, the teachers that they've had in their life, or anything like that. So I think it's definitely something to take into consideration. Yes.
I've learned that too with writing, because I find that people receive, books. I mean, I mostly write fiction, right? And so people receive the fiction with their own viewpoints, right? So they bring their own viewpoints, they bring their own perspectives, and then people will have varying, perspectives or varying takes on what I've written, on what this, they'll sort of like project a backstory into a character I never even thought of. And that's been such it's been a really like an interesting lesson in empathy for me, to understand how everyone brings their own perspective to story and to storytelling. And I tell the story, but then people interpret it and receive it in as many individual ways as there are readers. And I have found that actually an incredibly rewarding and also challenging part of the publishing process. Yeah.
And that's kind of analogous to what you were talking about a minute ago, whenever you wrote the paper on Lolita and you got the C on it.
Yeah.
Right. Like it kind of comes full circle, but you see that you're like, well, maybe I should have gotten an A, and that professor, I would give that professor a C for his interpretation. Right. So
he had a totally different experience to that point than I had. And so we both brought competing interests, perspectives to that point.
Have you sent him any of your books?
He was one in charge of the grades. So.
Have you sent him any of your published books?
That's very funny. I have not. I actually do have. I have kept in touch with other professors over the years, but he's not.
Okay, you need to like get every one of your books tied up in a pretty bow.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, I actually never thought of doing that until just now. So thank you.
Like thinking about you, I was talking about you the other day and our differences on Lolita, and I just wanted to. Send you the books that I've published. I'm just kind of curious, like, have you published lately? I haven't seen your name out there or anything, but I'm just curious, but I was thinking about you. So here you go.
Yeah, it's funny. I think about him a lot, actually.
It is interesting.
About me, not at all. And I'm sure he'd be very interested to know how much I think about him. So, I look back at undergrad and I have a few professors that really resonated with me, and probably not a great way, right? And I think about them a lot. Inspire you in different ways. Yeah.
That's a good way to put it. It's really funny because I feel like that like one person in particular, I look at him and I think he had such an impact on my life trajectory.
Yeah.
And he probably doesn't even know I exist. Like, I was just one of hundreds of students I'm sure he's ever had, if not thousands. So but it's interesting how that happens. But so you're at Skadden. So were you there all of your 10 years?
So no, so yes, I was there for 10 years, but I actually, so after my federal clerkship in DC, I then actually went to a boutique firm in New Jersey. It's funny, I was not going to practice in New York. I was going to stay in Philadelphia. And I'm from Pennsylvania. I was originally going to practice in Philadelphia. So I took the Pennsylvania and New Jersey bars because I was going to be in or around Philadelphia. And then, as luck would have it, I ended up moving to New York. There was a man involved, of course.
I mean, it happens to the best of us.
Yeah, it does. So I moved to New York but I wasn't barred in New York. But I was barred in New Jersey. So I was commuting out to New Jersey and I got this job with a boutique law firm out there. And it was a fabulous position. And I was there for 3 years and it was a litigation firm. I was in court all the time. They only hired law clerks, but it was a firm in New Jersey and I was living in New York and I was commuting out of New York. And so I started to get courted by Skadden and I decided to jump ship. And I remember when I went to the hiring partner's office at my old firm and I said, I was taking this job in Skadden, and he said, you are going to hate it there. And I was like, what? Why would I hate it at Skadden? And he was like, you're a litigator and you are going to hate it there. And it was funny. I mean, there were a lot of red flags because here I was interviewing at Skadden, but I was trying a case at my old firm and I'd have to schedule my interviews around like depositions and trial dates. And I remember the attorneys at Skadden being like, you're what? You're gonna be in court? You're gonna be in deposition, but aren't you like a second year associate? Like, I don't understand. And I didn't think to myself like, wow, that's kind of a red flag, And so I left, right? And all of a sudden here I was at Skadden, and the expectation was that I was gonna be like locked in a room doing document,
Were you doing document review? Is that what they had you do? Like,
well, I was too young to know what I didn't know. So when I took the job, I said, oh yeah, I would love to be part of I was joining the Mass Torts litigation department. And I said, I would love it. And just FYI, one thing, I'll do anything, but one thing I won't do is document review. And in hindsight, it was so arrogant, but, and they were like, oh. So they didn't assign me to a document review. They assigned me with, some associates and a partner who were doing a lot of briefing, and that's what I did. But my days of being in court every week were over. And and so I did eventually work my way up to doing expert work, and I did a lot of expert depositions, and I was part of a trial team, but I wasn't in court the way I was in the past. And it was intellectually challenging work and it was interesting work. And listen, nobody was more surprised than me that I was there for 10 years. But it was, it was everything the storybooks tell you it is. I mean, there was a lot of drama and I was sleeping on my floor and I always had a change of clothes in my office and I slept under my desk because my office the lights were motion censored and I would sleep under my desk so that I didn't turn the lights on in the middle of the night and I could get a couple hours of sleep. I mean, it was all the things that you think it is. And the people were all the characters and all the stereotypes of all the people. And then I started having kids, which was like unheard of.
Yeah. How does that go over? Like, I just want a normal human experience. I want to have a baby, right? And you're thinking,
I hid it for a while. Like I hid that I was pregnant for a while. And then I had someone confront me. I had a partner confront me. He said, I've noticed you are not, he literally said to me, I've noticed you are not using artificial sweetener in your coffee anymore. And I want to know if you're pregnant. Yeah. I mean, this wasn't like 1902, by the way,
Wait, if people can see my face, if they're only listening to the podcast, I am just, I don't even know what to say. Like, pick my chin up off the floor because.
And then I made the very arguably questionable decision to continue working after I had kids. And I kept saying, I'll figure this out. I still wanted to work. I banked all my leave and I took long, like 6 to 7 month maternity leaves. I had 3 kids while I was working at Skadden. That is more outrageous than any verdict I worked on, I promise you. And so each time I had a baby, I kept it a secret, really. And I just kind of banked my sabbatical, my leave time. And then I would tell them basically on the eve of leaving. And there was no maternity policy.
Having a baby tomorrow.
No, there was literally no maternity policy. There was no written, there was no, I did go to a partner on the side and negotiated a part-time schedule, which was basically me being in the office 4 days, working from home 3 days. It was very much like, keep this on the down low. Don't let anyone know you're doing this. I would have, I'd be in reviews with the partner and he'd say, you're doing a great job. Nobody would ever know you have kids and you're doing a great job. Yeah. I mean, I would have no pictures of my kids in my office. The dads would be talking about going to baseball practice, whatever. I mean, if I had a kid with an earache, I would tell them that I was bleeding, that's why I was home. I mean, I would never say I was home with a sick kid. And I tried to not be home with a sick kid, but occasionally you had to. And yeah, I mean, it was really barbaric. And I ended up leaving. My 3 kids were 5, 3, and 1 when I finally threw in the towel for my sabbatical. Again, I said, they were little. Yeah. And I said, I'm going to take a 1-year sabbatical. I'm going to take a deep breath. Things have gotten a little out of control. And my husband at the time was he was in his residency. Yeah, he was, I had put him through medical school and he was not a partner in the process, right? So he had his own thing going on. And he was in his residency at the time that I left. He was actually just starting his fellowship at the time I left. And it just was like a good segue for me taking a year off to regroup. And the idea was, I'm just going to regroup. We'll see where we are at the end of this year. Yeah. How, can I make it work? Do I miss it? Can I make it work another way? Is there something else I can do with my law degree, which was something I really had never thought about. I mean, as you know, when I was in college, I gave up everything for law school, right? That was the only thing I was ever going to do was practice law. So,
you're a lawyer.
Yeah.
You have your mind is, I am a lawyer. Like there's that self-identification as a lawyer.
But as I got away from it, and it wasn't until I left that I started to understand what happened was I was doing some writing and I was doing some work for this startup company that I had discovered. I'd met the woman who was president of the startup company, had been a former magazine editor in New York. And I was just doing like a little writing for her on the side, in addition to a lot of other projects that I was doing. And then what I started to understand, and they didn't need a lawyer. They had a venture capital firm behind them and their own legal counsel, but the creative team could not talk to the legal team. And they kept saying to me, every time we ask the lawyers for something, they say no. Can you help us figure out how to ask them for something and say yes?
Yeah.
And so I became the translator.
You're like the liaison, right?
Yeah. I was like, that's because you're asking for this. You can't say it like this. You got to say it like this. And then they're like, I said, then you get the same result, different words. It's all good. And so then I was like, wow, there's actually other things I could do besides practicing law that are so fun. And so I did. I ended up working for that company. I ended up at the end of the year taking a job with that company and extending my sabbatical to a 3-year leave of absence. And I stayed at the startup company for those 3 years. And then I was working on a book on the side, which I didn't leave the law to write a book, but I had this idea for a woman at a crossroads in her life, questioning every decision she'd ever made. Not surprisingly, that would be the, but I told her.
Who is this based upon, right?
Right. I was telling it was, not autobiographical. I was telling in the context of this love story. And I started to think, wait, I'll just work on this on the side, as sort of a creative outlet. And eventually, after a couple of years, I decided to pursue publication. But and then I left the startup company. But it was just, it was one of those very interesting, I was open to things that, and then I was, I was open to things as they presented themselves. I was able to take advantage of them, but I didn't even really understand what was possible until I actually left law, which is what a message I give to a lot of would-be transitioning lawyers who are like, I want to leave, I want to do something else, but I have no idea what, and what on earth could I do when I leave? And I always try to explain to people, first of all, think about it, like explore it on the side. That's a big theme of mine.
Mhm.
But also, until you leave, you don't actually even understand the world outside of these walls. And so
You don't know how amazing it is outside of big law.
I don't know any, I don't know any, I always say like, transitioning lawyers always say their only regret is that they didn't do it sooner. Unless there's one demographic that will express some regret. And it's always people, usually women, who have left to become full-time caregivers, who haven't left to be caregivers alongside something else, who have left to be full-time caregivers. And my hypothesis that seems to hold up is because a lot of those women have been pushed out too soon. And if you're pushed out too soon, you will have regrets because you should leave on your own timeline.
Yeah,
And
is it your decision? Like, is it even your decision at that point, right?
Yeah.
It's like,
yeah. And I didn't leave to be a full-time caregiver,
Mhm.
but had I left to be a full-time caregiver, I think I was on my timeline. Like, I think I did leave on my own. I left at the time that I was ready. But if you don't leave on your own timeline, then you have regrets. And so I often tell people, like, don't leave, don't run out the door, just like at its worst, like wait, take a beat,
yeah,
and cultivate your exit strategy, because running out the door too soon will lead to regrets, right? So
sure. I like that, cultivating an exit strategy. So
yeah.
when you took your sabbatical, you weren't necessarily cultivating an exit strategy.
No, I was winging it for sure. I was
Yeah.
winging it. And so I was just of the mindset that I would spend 1 year doing things that I wanted to do, and I wouldn't do anything I didn't want to do. I was like, I only have a year. I don't know what's going to happen at the end of this year, and I got to make it count, right? So I didn't finish books that I didn't love. I didn't finish meals I didn't love. Like, I was just like, we're going to only do things we love, right?
Love that.
So I did write, and I did a lot of advocacy work, and I worked I volunteered for a nonprofit, and I did some pro bono work, and I was doing writing for this startup company, and I was doing all of those things. And then, some like freelance writing, like nonfiction writing. And then at the end of the year, I sort of was like, well, let's see what rises to the top. And what rose to the top was the work that I was doing with the startup company, because it had legs and it was interesting to me. And it was allowing me to continue writing, which I found, which as I was like reclaiming that part of me, I was discovering that was definitely something I didn't want to give up again.
So how did you tell the firm?
Well, at first I told them that I just wanted to turn it into a 3-year sabbatical. And, and then I just sort of like sent you an email saying I'm not coming back.
No big deal.
Yeah, by that point it was just like, it was a long goodbye. It was a long goodbye. I mean, when I left for the sabbatical, I remember I remember saying my goodbyes, and I remember a couple of people saying to me, well, you'll be back in a year. And I remember thinking to myself, I don't know if I will, but I sort of like left it open.
Sure.
And so it was a long goodbye. And then by the time I said goodbye, I was ready.
Okay. So this is, I love this. And I love the idea of taking a sabbatical. And I always tease that. I was at a bigger firm it wasn't technically a big law firm, but I was at a bigger firm for years, and I wanted to take a sabbatical, because I needed clarity. I felt like I was drowning, right? Like, and this was like probably around 2009, 2010. It was after
when I took mine.
Yeah. And it was after the recession, and part of me was kind of like, or I guess kind of during the recession. And part of me was like, can't take a sabbatical. Like, I'm lucky to have a job right now. Like, I'm seeing people get their walking paper, I'm seeing this happen every day. Like, I need to stay here. So at that point, couldn't even like really, like for me to entertain it, it just seemed
Yeah.
comical, but you managed to make this happen. And
Well,
I want to know, like, how can other women make it happen for them? Right. Because I want them to be able to, if they think that taking a year sabbatical would be a really good idea in terms of like getting clarity and where they are,
yeah.
they should have that opportunity and they shouldn't be afraid to ask for it. Does Skadden already have something kind of in place for that? Or how did that?
So they don't, except they had a temporary window, which I climbed through. So what happened was during the recession, instead of other firms were laying off, and Skadden decided as a PR move, instead of laying anyone off, they would offer this sabbatical and you could apply for it. And you were guaranteed your job back at the end of the year. And but you had to apply for it. So when I saw this come across my inbox, I thought this was, divine intervention. And I immediately applied for it and I was immediately denied because I was told, no, this isn't for you. This is for the M&A attorneys who have no work, right? So all the M&A attorneys, I was a litigator. Litigation is impervious to economic decline, right?
Yeah.
So we were still busy, but all the M&A attorneys were sitting around with empty inboxes and they were nervous about their jobs. And so when the sabbatical was announced, and when it was announced that they weren't going to do layoffs, they were going to do the sabbatical, none of the M&A lawyers applied for it because they were like, oh, okay, we're going to sit here and do nothing for a year and we'll be fine. And all the litigators applied for it. And so they were like, no.
Not you guys.
No, we met everyone else but you. You can't take it. And so I did push back and I did tell the head of my department, I said, it was supposed to be open to everybody. And I really want to take this year and it's only a year. And what they ended up doing was, because so many litigators applied for it and no M&A attorneys, they ended up restructuring and they ended up moving the M&A lawyers into litigation and giving the litigators who were applying for the sabbatical. Yeah. And there was this hope that people would self-select out and that everything would fix itself so that they wouldn't have to actually lay off. And I think that worked. I think it worked. So yes and no. So I took advantage of something that was available to me, but I do recommend people try to negotiate, even if not a year, at least 6 months sabbatical. And mine was partially subsidized, but obviously it saved the firm some costs. So you have that, that leverage and that negotiation point, some time off, save the firm some money. And also it was called Sidebar Plus. That's what they called this sabbatical program. And it was a big PR thing. And so I often tell people too, like, if you can get some press and get some media exposure for your firm, allowing you to explore this, something else, it benefits the firm too. So those are the things that I sort of often tell people to try to use to negotiate, because yes, you can explore other things and your weekends off or your banked vacation time that you never use and never take. But the most productive time off is trying to do like a 6-month, 1-year sabbatical. And listen, in the context of a sabbatical, there's relatively low risk as long as you negotiated, an end date and that you'll come back at the end of that year, or that you have the ability to come back at the end of the year, right? It becomes a lower risk alternative for you. And I do think it gives you the freedom. I do think it gives you the true freedom to truly explore. So yeah.
And it's not during maternity leave.
Yeah. Oh yeah. There's no right. I was not on maternity leave.
Yeah, this is not maternity leave.
Not maternity leave. There was no exploring side gigs when I was on maternity leave.
Exactly.
And to your point that at a time of economic challenge is the worst time to ask for a sabbatical. Maybe not, right? Because maybe it's the time to tell the firm, hey, maybe you're grappling with hiring decisions, maybe you're grappling with laying off decisions. Take a beat, offer 3 to 5 sabbatical positions in the department or whatever, and allow for people to possibly self-select out and possibly recharge. And that's only, saving the firm money and then hopefully more productive down the road.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
So if you're totally exhausted, if you're burnt out, if you're
Yeah.
feeling overwhelmed,
Yeah.
or if you feel like you just need to like get some clarity in what you want to do going forward, I think it's so challenging to do that when you are kind of like in that daily grind of being a lawyer and wearing that hat. I mean, because your needs, your personal needs are not necessarily first, especially when you have children and you're working in big law. I think no, go ahead.
No, I'm sorry. I don't want to interrupt you.
No,
I do think that we have this vision of ourselves as being so utterly replaceable and dispensable when we work in law firms. And it's the culture. It's not unfounded. We are treated like that in many ways. The reality is you're not as dispensable as you think you are, right? It costs them more to hire somebody new and onboard somebody new than it does to just bring you back after a short sabbatical. So remind them of that, even though they will have forgotten it.
And I think this is a really good point, Amy, that you as a lawyer in your firm, you have more leverage and bargaining power than you realize.
Yeah.
I definitely did not feel that way. I felt freaking lucky. Like I was like, well, I felt like a cog, right? There you back to kind of what you were saying about being indispensable. I felt like a cog, but then I felt like a pretty lucky cog.
Yeah.
Keeping the wheels going, right? And so it's about, well, Louisville wasn't really impacted by the recession as heavily and as quickly as New York, right? And so all the firms were kind of
trickle. Yeah,
we were like the old trickle down effect, right? But yeah, I mean, a lot of those big firms were scrambling. I recall that now. And I think now, we're not seeing, well, this is actually interesting. I'm not familiar with whether or not these firms are doing sabbaticals right now, because I know that, the economy is a little, I mean, I don't want to say it's bad. It's kind of weird right now, right? Maybe that's the word. It's a little uncertain. So, but if you're thinking about wanting to take a sabbatical, it does sound like, it could be a good time to broach the subject with your firm.
Yeah.
And to really understand that you do have you have more bargaining power than you understand.
Yes. I agree with that. And, it's not the best idea to run out the door with no plan B at your worst possible moment, right? For a lot of reasons, for your own personal morale and emotional reasons, for your future networking reasons, right? You want to leave all those bridges intact and those doors open. And so the sabbatical can be even a good way to sort of like do a softer goodbye, right? Leave for a little bit, come back, make sure that the relationship, see what's out there, sort of start to put together your strategy, come back, and then leave on your own terms, a little bit down the road with those relationships intact and your emotional energy restored a little bit. Yeah.
Because you're going to need it even when you're on a sabbatical, right?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. And it's good to like leave and be in a positive mindset and making decisions from a positive mindset, right? Rather than kind of being at your lowest point, upset, freaking out, overwhelmed, and then making decisions. Those are not good places to be making decisions from.
No.
I know from experience.
Right. You don't want to make decisions from a point of desperation or fear, right? So it's another reason why you also want to cultivate the financial. You want to work on the identity issues and the choice issues, and you also want to cultivate the financial piece, right? So you want to save some money. You want to redefine your relationship with money. I always say to people, like, you can actually live on less money than you think you can, because you are there's a whole category of expenses that falls away when you leave a job you hate. This whole self-soothing category that just falls away, right? I didn't have to go out to dinner every night. I didn't have to go on expensive vacations. I didn't have to buy myself expensive handbags or clothes and spa days. Like, there was just a whole category of expenses that fell away that I had no idea I was even spending money on. So there's that. But you have to redefine your relationship with money, because the billable hour method makes you think you are worth a certain amount of money. And so you think if I leave the law, I have to make that much money or I have wasted something or I'm
Right.
not worth it. So you have to work on all of those pieces. And then you have to have a little bit of money set aside so that you don't have to operate from fear and desperation.
Right. You don't necessarily have to go out and buy the Prada, handbags.
Yeah. Exactly.
You're not having expensive dinners. And I think it's really interesting that you mentioned the self-soothing. I have 2 notes here specifically from the other podcast that you're on. And the one is sabbatical, because I was like, I really want to talk to you about sabbatical, because I think that is something that's so interesting. And I was just admire you so much for kind of taking that leap, right? But kind of a soft leap, like you were.
Yes, absolutely. Yep.
I admire you for that. I wanted other people to kind of consider that as an option, right? Like if anything, to plant a seed.
Yes.
And then the other note I have here is self-soothing.
Yes.
Because I kind of forget about that, but I do remember, even when I was, at a bigger firm, kind of doing the same thing, right? It's like, oh God, like, I need to call the therapist, or like,
Well, not about giving up your therapist when you leave the law.
Better keep her on speed dial.
I always say don't give up your therapist and don't give up your childcare, actually, when you leave the law. Like those expenses are important, but but it's true what you say. Like there's this notion of like, well, I am making this money. I'm going to spend it on myself. I'm going to spend it on things that, and you don't need to do that when you're not in a place that you hate or a place where you're miserable. You don't necessarily need to, you won't need as much therapy, and you won't need any retail therapy. Maybe not any, but you won't need as much.
It's so funny because I did not realize I was in a pretty deep self-soothing space. Really, until I heard you talking about that. And I was like, oh gosh, like, I think that I was probably doing a lot of that. And I think that I was probably spending a lot of money unnecessarily. And I don't know if it's like a type of like validation. Is that like like, I am so unhappy in this career, or like kind of my day to day but I can go do this thing. Like, look what I can go do. And I'm in control in this area because I can
absolutely
get a flight to New York tomorrow or like, that kind of stuff. So it's very
absolutely. It is about regaining control. Absolutely. Because we feel so helpless and we feel so when we feel like we're just heading down a path that is being decided for us instead of us being in the driver's seat. We just look for other means of control. I mean, that's how, eating disorders and substance abuse and other, really traumatic things start happening in the law and in other areas where people are feeling those same emotions.
Yeah. And where else do we see it more than any place? I mean, big law, you see it so much.
Yeah.
So I'm curious, I want to be mindful of your time. And this has been amazing. I've loved getting into your brain.
Thank you.
What's next for you? I need to know what your next projects are. What are you working on? Are you writing today?
Yeah. So my
snowy Pennsylvania day.
I know. Actually, snow days are my favorite days to write. So two big things are happening this year, which feel a little like full circle moments for me. One is that my second nonfiction book is going to be released. I'm working with a co-author on a book called How to Leave the Law. And Liz Brown, who is a Harvard Law graduate, but she now teaches business law at Bentley undergrad. She wrote a book called Life After Law around the time that Lawyer Interrupted, well, right before Lawyer Interrupted came out, because she actually wrote the foreword for Lawyer Interrupted. And for a long time, there weren't a lot of people in this space talking about like successful transitions. And so we were always kind of running into each other. And as the years have gone by, we've talked a lot about writing follow-ups to our respective books. And then we decided to collaborate together. So we're writing a book called How to Leave the Law. We're handing it to our editor next month. And it's coming out hopefully like later this year. We just had our cover. Actually, it's going to be revealed soon. So I'm excited about that. Yeah. And that feels good. But the other really big full circle moment for me is that my next novel is coming out. It's the first in a series, and it's my first true legal drama. And I never wrote legal drama before. I have one book that was sort of marketed as a legal thriller, but it has a courtroom scene in the beginning. It really is a psychological suspense novel. And so this is my true first legal drama. It's definitely a courtroom drama at the intersection of I call it the intersection of courtroom drama and psychological suspense. So it's still suspense, which is a favorite genre for me, but it's definitely a courtroom book. And it's about a former lawyer who goes back to the law for one case only, to defend the woman accused of murdering the lawyer's husband. And so there's reasons that she takes on this defense, and she has secrets of her own, and it's called In Her Defense. And it's the first of a legal series called the River's Edge Law Club series. The idea is that it's a fictional town. It's a town that is supposed to be a commuter town to Manhattan. So it's close enough to Manhattan to have all of that fun to it, but it's a town that's impersonating a small town. Basically, it has a main street and has all the trappings and like visual markers of a small town, but it's not really, because it's a commuter town to Manhattan, right? So it's small enough that everybody should know each other's secrets, but they really don't. But at the center of this town is a law club, and it's called the River's Edge Law Club. And it's like a country club, except it's not. It's a country club for lawyers, right? And so like other towns have, they're known for their biotech industry, or they're known for their retail flagship, but this town is known for its lawyers. And it's got this,
I love it.
Yeah, it's got this law club, and that's where all the backdoor deals happen, and all the, corruption gets swept under the carpet, and the judges have martini lunches there, and the women aren't necessarily always made to feel welcome. And so the series will be, each series will feature a different unlikely heroine, sort of exposing corruption and backdoor politics in this town. But it will kind of move back and forth from, it's like kind of like I said, it's a fictional town, but it's sort of almost meant to be like a Hudson Valley, New York town. And so it moves back and forth between River's Edge and Manhattan. And I'm really excited about it. So In Her Defense is coming out this May. And, I used to, when I would go to book clubs or when I would go to book parties, people would say to me, why don't you write legal fiction? I'm bringing my dog up here. Sorry.
Good. No.
I've got she around the corner. I got him sitting here. He wants to say hi. So people would always say to me like, "What? Oh, yay!
Don't bring your dogs in today."
I bring your dog to work day. So this is my dog Don Vito, because he looks like Marlon Brando.
Hey, handsome. He's so handsome.
Yeah. So people would always say to me like, "Why don't you write legal fiction? You were a lawyer for so long." And I used to always say, "Well, I didn't." I was a corporate litigator, like not the sexy kind of law, right? So, but as time has gone by and I've started to think more about my time in the law and how like the themes that I worked on and how those years sort of impacted me, it has found its way into my writing. So, so in the same year that my book, How to Leave the Law, is being published, I'm also publishing my first legal drama, which is going to be kind of, it'll be interesting. It'll be interesting to see if we
cannot wait.
Follow along. Yeah, I'm excited. Yeah. So
and I follow you on Amazon.
Yeah. Oh, good. Yeah. Okay. So it's In Her Defense is available for pre-order right now. It will be out in paperback, audio, and ebook May 3rd. So yeah.
May 3rd. Okay. Amazing. So let me ask you this. Where can people find you in addition to being on Amazon? So if you just go to Amazon, search for Amy Impellizzeri, you can find her, you can follow her author. There's like a little follow next to your name.
Yeah.
So where else can people find you?
So my website, if you go to amyimpellizzeri.com, you can sign up for my newsletter, and then you'll get alerts for when my books are coming out, when the pub date hasn't been announced yet for How to Leave the Law. But as I said, In Her Defense, the pub date is May 3rd. But there are also going to be advanced copies of both books available. And if you sign up for the newsletter, then you'll find out how to sign up for chances to get advanced copies of those books. So
Okay.
yeah.
That's amazing. And I can't wait to see like the TV drama that is made on In Her Defense. Like I can see it now. Okay. So who, like in your book, who would play your main character?
Yeah. Oh gosh, that's so interesting because I actually have a reviewer, a favorite book blogger of mine, and whenever she reads the books, my book or any book, she always does like a fictional cast.
Oh, fun.
So yeah, I know.
That's
so
cool.
I'm always interested to see how people cast my book.
Yeah.
I don't know. So the two characters are Ingrid Delorio is the lawyer who is a former lawyer who comes back, and her client is Opal Rowan, and they're both very they're both very interesting characters to me, but also very diametrically different.
Mhm.
And so I don't know. I have to think about it a little bit. Actually, that's funny.
Yeah.
That's the first time I've thought about who would play them. Certainly not me. And this series, even though it's ironically a legal drama series, is probably the least. All of my other books, I always say, like before this, my first 5 novels, set end to end, were like my memoir, right? I write fiction because I'm not brave enough to write nonfiction, but they were very personal, right? They were very personal stories. They were not autobiographical, but they were very personal. But this series, ironically, even though it's legal drama, I think is probably the least personal, most imaginative effort of mine. So I think that's why it'll be interesting to see how people receive them.
I think that's amazing. And I'm going to go pre-order your book when we get off.
Okay, awesome. Thank you.
That's amazing. I'm so excited for you.
Thank you.
I will put a link to your website in the show notes. So I'm going to wrap this up, but I want to thank you so much for being here. And you told me at the beginning of our conversation that you get your inspiration from living life. So go out and play in the snow, do whatever you got to do for
yes.
So
and you do the same. Thank you for having me. This is wonderful. I think it's wonderful what you're doing, and I wish you all the best, and I'm glad to be in touch, and now we'll stay in touch, I hope.
You too, Amy. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye, my friend.
Bye.